Good evening all and welcome. Religion is a fine thing until used maliciously, as we will see about with these cult stories. So for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was around 21 or 22 when this happened, stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, still oblivious to the fact that Desert Storm was just around the corner. On my weekends, I stayed out in the country near Duncan, helping out my friend James on his family's cattle farm. Well, one night, just past 1 a.m., we were out on dirt bikes trying to round up some cattle that had gotten loose after a car tore through a fence in a T-section. It had taken out 2 posts, leaving a 30-foot gap. By then, we'd already found most of the cows, just a few still unaccounted for. And if one of them wandered into the road and got hit, James' dad would be the one sued. We split into teams. James and I headed east, scanning roads and bushes with spotlights strapped to our handlebars, bouncing through dusty, rutted back roads. Oklahoma is mostly farmland, split into a grid of mile-square sections, each bordered by east, west, and north-south roads. The countryside is dead quiet at night. Open land with nothing going on. Most sections had no homes, just the occasional old barn. We mapped out a 10 by 10 mile grid, and were halfway through it. Our plan was to keep at it until we found the last few cows or got too tired. We were deep in a stretch of land we knew well, an abandoned, overgrown area too hilly for planting, and no one had lived there for decades. The road we followed had narrowed to a pair of ruts, snaking through the brush. The trail ended in a T-intersection. West was fenced off, so our only option was to turn east. And that's when we saw the fire. It flickered over the crest of the next hill. We revved our bikes up to the incline, expecting to see a grass fire. Instead, it was a recliner. A blue, threadbare recliner fully engulfed in flames sitting in the center of the dirt road. We stopped and stared at it like it had dropped out the sky. "Who the hell brings a recliner out here to burn?" James asked, no one in particular. We killed the engine and used dirt and boots to smother the flames. The chair was charred black by the time we got it out, but there were no tire tracks or footprints, or anyone. Just a burning recliner on a dead-end road that no one used. We mounted back up and coasted past the smoking heap, our headlights cutting through the dust, and just a few 100 feet ahead, we saw a cow. It was collapsed halfway across the road, throat slit open and blood soaking into the dirt. It was dead. We froze. James leaned down and pointed to something near the carcass. Shoe prints. Just partial impressions in the blood and dust, but undeniably human, and 3 prints leading away from the cow. Should we go back or call the others? We decided to keep moving. Whatever was happening, we needed to see it through. We shut the bikes off and walked them, inching forwards in the silence. And then we noticed paper plates. Someone had pierced paper plates along the top wire of the fence on both sides of the road, spaced every 5 feet or so, fluttering in the breeze like weird white flags. They started behind us and stretched ahead up over the next hill. Another fire. I caught the scent then of smoke, but not just smoke. It was sweet, spicy incense or something. I wanted to turn back. I didn't care what people said. I was absolutely terrified. But James insisted we had to see, so we pushed the bikes further. Halfway up the hill, a paper plate tore loose and tumbled past us, and we both flinched. Then we started listening intently. There was this low rhythmic chanting. We crept to the crest of the hill, crouching just enough to stay hidden. Below us, in the bowl at the road's end, stood a ring of people, about 10 or so, backs to us, all gathered around another burning recliner. The fire cast long shadows, and they were all chanting in unison, their voices rising and falling with a strange cadence. Some held a large pitcher and passed it around. Each person took a mouthful and spit into the flames over and over. I couldn't make out everything they said, but I caught fragments here and there like, "We beseech thee, Father," and it was repeated over and over. Behind them stood a folding table, and on it was a large object wrapped in cloth that looked like a loaf of bread. The moment the man holding the pitcher turned to set it down and picked up the object, he froze. Because he had seen us. "Hey!" he screamed and pointed straight at us. The loaf dropped. Others turned, eyes catching us in silhouette, and they charged. We turned to run, fumbling our bikes. James got his started instantly. Mine tipped the handlebars, twisting into my leg as I kicked, and I swore. I got the bike upright, kicked again, and nothing. The shouting and the rabble grew louder, and I finally jumped on and began rolling downhill. I popped the clutch, the engine sputtered and roared to life. James waited at the intersection, waving frantically, and I peeled out behind him. We tore back through the dark, the road flashing by under our tires. And when we got to his house, we were shaking. We told his dad, Buster, everything. Burning chairs, the cow, the people, the fire. He didn't ask if we were sure, he just nodded and then called 2 of his friends, who arrived with rifles, shotguns, and didn't ask any questions. We retraced our steps, and when we reached the hill, the fire was gone, and the second recliner was missing. The cow was gone too, but the scorch marks were still there, blackened patches in the grass and dirt. So were the tracks our bikes had left. The first recliner, the one that we put out, was now in a ditch. The cow had been dragged across the road and dumped in the opposite ditch, but we couldn't see the paper plates. The people, of course, were gone. In the light of the trucks, we walked the area. Buster found a scrap of a red bandana stuck in the fence where someone had crawled over, and we followed the trampled grass across a creek, up a shallow bank and through a field. A single white tennis shoe lay abandoned in the weeds. At the next road, tire marks scarred the dirt. Maybe 3 or 4 had peeled out, and a large shard of glass smeared with blood lay nearby. Later, the sheriff told Buster the blood on the glass was human. They never found the cow. 2 weeks later, rumors exploded about a cult planning to sacrifice a blonde-haired virgin boy and girl. But no one ever came forward. It's been decades, and I really wonder what was happening on that evening. I was an exchange student from Malaysia and was placed in Missouri in 2006. The family I stayed with was a family of 4, with a son and a daughter. They lived somewhere around Webster Groves. At first, they seemed nice, warm and welcoming, but this was all in fact a facade. They were trying to gain my trust, and because I came from a country where your neighbors might be practicing a dozen different religions at once, I was already very alert to this sort of thing. The first week was fine, but I would sometimes wake up early and find them gathered in the kitchen in a circle around the table, mumbling and whispering. They would stop the second I walked in, and it was honestly disconcerting, but I brushed it off at first and assumed it was just some American family quirk. By the second or third week, it got worse. The boy would not touch me because I was born from sin, at least that's what he said, and the girl was afraid of me because I had spoken to her father while looking at him in the eye. I started testing things, asking questions whenever I noticed small reactions to things that should have been normal, like reading before bed, talking directly to the parents, or eating sandwiches. Those little things would trigger nervous gasps or hyperventilation. The girl told me that I had residues of the wicked on me, and that I was going to hell. She told me about a cleanse and a daily prayer wash. I saw them singing the same hymns over and over again, reciting the same old verses, and it honestly started to creep me out. I was not stupid, I realized I was in a cult when they took me to church. They made me sit in the front, and the pastor was clearly conducting the special service for me. I knew it from the moment I looked around and saw that everyone in the room was staring straight at me. I may as well have had a neon sign pointing straight at my head. It felt like I had honestly wandered into the set of a horror movie. The men and the women were separated. People wore different colored ribbons on their wrists, and the children looked haunted, gaunt, and frightened. Nobody spoke to me, and no one came near me. The men never looked me in the eye, and the women kept their distance. I went there a grand total of twice. School was on break, so I had to stay with them full time. A lot of strange things happened, but nothing was as bad as waking up in the middle of the night to find the mother sitting beside me, reciting verses from the Bible in the dark. The moment I opened my eyes, she stopped and silently walked away. After that, the family treated me even worse. I was punished for being out of line. No dinner, locked until morning, no sweet drinks. I had to wear long-sleeved tops and long pants or skirts. I think I lasted as long as I did because I was curious and because they probably assumed that since I was from Southeast Asia, I would be gullible and easy to manipulate. They kept trying to brainwash me about how sinful I was, how lost I was, and how the world was going to end unless I accepted their teachings. I was there for a month before our chapter coordinator came for a visit. I told her everything outside the house. Naturally, I left with her immediately. About an hour later, we came back with a group from the exchange organizations and found them in the middle of burning the things of the sinful non-believer. Thankfully, my passport and the rest of my important documents were untouched. I never did find out what kind of cult they were, though. I grew up on a hill, only a good 300 feet tall, to the east of Silicon Valley. Nearby, a rich dude purchased land with very ambitious plans for a golf course and country club. Now this was about a quarter mile from my home, and it was planning to boast tennis courts, golf, several pools, and 5 yurt round-type buildings with different functions, weightlifting, aerobics, party spot, and much more. In short, the place was supposed to be the pinnacle of luxury. However, it never reached its lofty goals, and at some point the developers decided to abandon it. Well, fast forward a few years, and we were in our early teens, TPing houses, firing flare guns at cops, doing minor vandalism, and a hell of a lot of urbex, seeing the interior of the Forgotten Country Club. It was during one of our escapades that we found ritual drawings in various locations around the place. We went to the library to try and uncover what we were looking at, and that's when we found them to be satanic in nature. We discovered large drawings on the floor and walls in what was supposed to be a large party hall, and also noticed that even if it was 100 degrees outside, it would still be cold in that specific area. We knew people were there at night because our bus stop was in the parking lot, and we could spend mornings breaking the many hundreds of bottles left sitting around by the older teenagers at night. Anyway, we were running around at 2 a.m. one Friday, and we could see the lights in the club, and decided to sneak up and around through the golf course from the back. There were more bushes than trees there, and we crept up and got into earshot and sight, and saw people there in hooded robes performing what must have been a ritual. After a few minutes of hearing them chant, one of them suddenly turns and points in our direction, and then the rest stop what they're doing and look. I don't know how they saw us, it was so dark. We couldn't hear what they said, but then they all started sprinting towards us in the dark. In a moment of panic, we sprang into action and hid in some nearby bushes, hoping and praying not to be discovered. Thankfully, they kept going further ahead, and ran all the way to the golf course, combing the area to try and find us to do who knows what to us. Thankfully, when most of them were out of sight, we left the area and did not come back exploring again. I don't know what those people were doing. It didn't look or sound good, and I'm glad we never got to find out. No church would meet at an abandoned golf club at midnight to practice weird chanting. We were hunting with my friend Tom, deep in the mountains of Northern California. We had climbed onto the top of the ridge to get a better view of the area and decide where we might have the best chance of finding pigs. I spotted a dirt road to the east, really a fire trail, and I was about to dismiss it when I noticed a line of campers moving along it. They disappeared behind a hill at the edge of the valley. I scanned the valley floor and found several more campers near the tree line. Tom suggested we go over and see if they could share a meal and a warm fire with two tired hunters. By the time we reached the hill, they had gone behind. It was already dark, so we climbed up to get one last look and estimate on the distance. What we found on the other side felt unreal. About half a mile away in the middle of the clearing there was a bonfire. Without saying a word, we both dropped low and crawled into some brush for cover, overlooking the valley. I began scanning the area, looking for the camp and any guards they might have posted. Tom checked the other side of the valley, then he grabbed my arm, and when I turned I followed his gaze. There were two groups of people standing near the edge of the valley below us. One group wore black hooded robes and the other wore white. Then a figure in a red hooded robe carrying a staff emerged from the trees and walked towards the fire. The others followed him behind in two single-file lines. When they reached the fire, the figure who was clad all in red raised his arms. The black robes began circling clockwise, the white robes counterclockwise, until they had completely surrounded the fire in alternating black and white. We could hear chanting, but we couldn't make out a single word. They kept walking and chanting and switching directions around the fire for what felt like forever. It must have been at least an hour that passed when the chanting stopped, and a naked man was brought out from the trees, who was bound and blindfolded. They presented him to each of the robed figures clockwise around the fire before bringing him to the red figure. They made him lie down at the red figure's feet, and after that, a naked woman was brought out, also bound, and the process repeated in the opposite direction counterclockwise. She was then laid before the man. I had no idea what I was watching or what I was supposed to do about it. There was more chanting than silence, and four black-robed figures emerged carrying a black robe that looked almost like a banner. They circled the fire clockwise, once behind the pair and once in front of them. Each black-figured robe touched the robe as it passed. When they reached the red figure, they stopped over the naked man. The red figure said something and one of the others answered. Then he pointed his staff at the man, and the four of them laid the robe over him. Another chant. A white robe was brought out, and the same thing happened again, only this time it was counterclockwise, stopping over the woman. The red figure said something, the other answered, and then he pointed his staff at her. The four figures laid the white robe over her. Then the red figure waved his hands and staff over both of them and lifted the staff high over his head. The robe bearers picked the robe up again, just as before, and the two people rose from the ground. The robe bearers then lifted the robes over their own heads. After that, the pair circled the fire twice, embracing each member of their color first. Then, the other side. When they got back to the red figure, he pointed towards the camp with the staff, and the newly accepted pair led the procession back into the trees. I watched them disappear into the darkness, then looked back towards the fire for the red figure. He had not moved. When the last couple left the clearing, the bonfire flashed green, then red, and the red-robed figure collapsed to the ground. We hiked the whole way back to our truck that night. Neither of us wanted to stop for anything. The next morning we pulled into a Denny's for breakfast, and we had put more than 60 miles between ourselves and that clearing and finally felt safe. While we were eating, two couples came in. One sat behind Tom and the other behind me, so that each of us could see one of them. They smiled at us while we ate. When we left, we saw two campers in the parking lot. Tom and I never talked about that night again. We found a better hunting area far away from that clearing. It's been nearly 50 years since then. I live in a rural part of Kentucky, and there's not much to do around here if you're a bored teenager. Like every other town, ours has its own urban legends. Kentucky also has a reputation for cult activity. There is a distillery out in the remote part of the area, sitting by the Kentucky River on a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. Kids around here love throwing parties there. My friend Jay happened to be one of those. He had moved to our school in the middle of the year, and before long, he seemed to know everybody, and everybody knew him. One day, during a painfully boring math lecture, Jay and I started talking about local myths and strange places around the area. There were a lot of them. He told me about the distillery and said he had heard rumors that a cult met there. Then, he started talking about the weird things he had seen himself, like dolls nailed to the walls inside the distillery and a homeless guy shooting at him down there. And that was enough to get my attention, and I decided I wanted to see the place for myself. A few friends and I made plans to go the following weekend and explore the area around it. The plan was for me to drive my car with 4 passengers and for Jay to drive his with 2 passengers, and I would just follow him there. Friday finally came, and the whole day at school we were buzzing about the trip. By 10 that night, we all met up and got moving. I followed Jay in his car while he drove ahead with his passengers. The drive seemed to go on forever, probably about 45 minutes, and I was honestly not even sure if we were still in the same town by the time we got deeper out there. It was then that Jay turned onto a little 2-lane road that looked normal enough at first. Nothing seemed overtly unusual right away. I kept following him for another 5 minutes or so, and that was when things started to really feel off. The road got narrower, and we passed a street sign with the word Hell spray painted on it. A few houses had strange red lights glowing from the inside, and several of the others looked like they were barely holding themselves together. A little further on, we passed the distillery and then turned left up another holler. That road was even worse. It went almost straight up the mountain, with no guardrail on the side at all. If you swerved off the road, you were done. We climbed all the way to the top and kept following it until we reached a gravelly driveway, and Jay stopped his car. "This is it," he said, getting out and walking over to mine. Right away, I noticed a few things that made me uneasy. The drive led to a huge house surrounded by trees. Hanging in some of those trees were ropes that looked a lot like nooses. There were signs everywhere warning people that they would be shot if they came onto the property. Off to the side of the road, in a clearing between the trees, I also noticed a strange rock formation, almost like some kind of miniature Stonehenge. After talking with Jay for a while about the route, and that we should go back home, we noticed lights coming down the drive, and a few of them at that. Jay shouted to drive, already running back to his own car. I immediately slammed on the gas. I left Jay and his passengers behind in seconds, throwing gravel and dust everywhere in the air. I nearly hit 3 deer that jumped out in front of the car. In the back seat, one of my best buddies started asking if we had seen the things behind us. I asked what he meant, and he said there were what looked like dogs on the road behind us, but they were way too big to actually be dogs. We got back into town and stopped at a Waffle House to go over what had just happened. Jay said he had seen a few dirt bikes and an ATV coming down the drive, and did not still want to be there when they got to the bottom. Could that have been the cult everyone was talking about? I may never know, and I'm glad I never found out. My friends and I had been out together for most of the evening already, and it had been a pretty hectic afternoon, let me tell you that. It was a fairly warm night, and as a result, we thought it would be pleasant to walk around town, which is something we all do often enough, and none of us really questioned it. There were 7 of us in total, including 2 15-year-olds and 4 16-year-olds, one of whom was only a month off turning 17 themselves. We had already been walking for over an hour. We usually go as far as the ice cream shop, which is the furthest point from the house where we meet up, and then turn around and head back. We were already more than halfway home, near a 4-way intersection by a Dunkin' Donuts, when we were all laughing about something stupid, and this woman on the other side of the street starts shouting at us. She looked probably in her mid-50s, maybe 60s, borderline elderly. Wait, stop, she yelled. Then she ran straight across the intersection through traffic to reach us. At that point, every instinct in me was screaming to turn around. The problem was that home was in the direction she had just come from, so we had to keep moving towards the same place she was standing. We reached the intersection just as she got to us. Oh good, you're all teenagers. Will you come to our concert later? We have 4 bands, it's teenager music, we have free pizza, snacks, brownies, cookies and popcorn. Needless to say, we were all a little thrown off by this weird invitation. We tried to politely say no, that we were heading home because it was really dark, but she kept talking over us. My friend tried to say she didn't really like that kind of music, and the woman immediately changed what she was saying. It's all kinds of music, come on, you'll love it. If you don't like it, you can just leave. It's only a mile up the street right over there, come on, you'll fit right in. Then she actually tried to steer us in the direction of the concert, like she just expected us to follow her like lemmings. By then there were already plenty of red flags. All of us felt extremely uncomfortable, but we were still trying to laugh it off. My cousin, who was pretty quick on her feet, held up her phone to ear like she was calling someone even though she wasn't. The cell service in town was notoriously bad. Hey, yeah, we're on our way back. Alright, be there in a few minutes. Okay, bye. Sorry, it was my dad. The woman barely reacted, but kept trying to convince us to go with her. By then the sun was almost completely down, and every one of us wanted to leave. One of my friends said, "We'll have to ask our parents first." No, don't tell your parents. It's only half a mile up the road, and you all have cell phones. You can just call them when you're there. At that point, we were all feeling very skeeved out. None of us said much. We were all standing there at the Dunkin' Donuts. Like, if we looked at it hard enough, we could be able to teleport inside it. Then she said, "Don't worry, it's in a church. Nothing bad can happen to you." A nervous laugh came from some of our mouths, but she wasn't backing off. "It's on until 9. We'll be there in half an hour." Then she waved across the street at another woman and 2 kids in a matching yellow t-shirt. They immediately came running over. The kids looked extremely uncomfortable, like they would have rather been boiling in a pit of acid than with this other woman. "These guys are coming to our concert," the woman announced. "They don't know anyone, but..." The older woman cut in as the kids started handing out flyers. "They don't know anyone? Perfect." At that point, we were all done with the conversation. We had no intention of being dragged into some weird cult concert. We crossed over to Dunkin' Donuts instead. They wanted us to promise we would go later, and we told them we would just to get out of there. We went inside and waited until the street had cleared of any people until we left. After that, I stopped going to the Baptist church completely and only went to his meetings. On Wednesdays they met at the Holiday Inn, and on Sundays they met in different friends' houses. Every member was called a friend. The meetings were not very big, with maybe 10 or 20 people at most, and every fall and spring they held conventions. Those were on somebody's farm, and every friend in the state would come in. Sometimes with people from surrounding states too. Those gatherings were huge. We would stay in quarters and listen to people speak from the Bible. You also had the chance to stand up and read a verse that meant something to you. It all happened slowly, over the course of 2 years or so. I must have been so focused on trying to do the right thing and follow Jesus that I did not realize I was being brainwashed. He took my virginity. I ended up living with them, and I honestly do not even know how that transition happened or whether my parents wondered where I was. My parents were in the middle of a messy divorce and probably didn't notice much. His mum did not believe in hospital or doctors and took a holistic approach to the family's health, including mine. She had me on different vitamins every day of the week. I was already very skinny, but over time I lost even more weight. I probably got down to about 80 or 90 pounds. She also gave me iodine drops under my tongue every day. All of that left me severely underweight, and I had almost completely stopped sleeping. I think the doctors later said it was from all the vitamin B12 in my system. While I was in that hazy state of mind, I ended up getting baptized in a lake at one of the conventions. Not long after we went home, I started having panic attacks, and everything from that time is just a blur to me. A huge panic attack finally pushed me over the edge, and I had a complete mental breakdown. I remember a few things very clearly. I tried to read the Bible to calm myself down, but I could not read anymore. Everything was just shapes and blobs, and that made me cry harder. My dad remarried 2 weeks after the divorce, and I became convinced that he and his new wife Nikki were both Satan because of it. I tried to jump off a very high hill near the house I was staying at, and I would have at least broken a lot of bones if not died. I also thought I was already dead, and believed their house was a coffin, and they were burying me inside while my soul listened to everything. Eventually they must have realized something was seriously wrong with me, or perhaps they just didn't want to be responsible for me because they found my dad's number and told him to come for me. I fought them the whole way, crying and screaming, but my dad took me back to his house. I did not sleep that night either. I thought his house were the Twin Towers, and that I was trapped inside them as they were collapsing. I started seeing little rainbows everywhere. Honestly, my brain was completely wrecked. The next day, my dad and stepmom took me to a behavioral health hospital. I remember it was the day Steve Irwin died, because my dad told me in the waiting room. And I thought for sure he had murdered Steve Irwin, and that's how he knew. I later realized it was on the news in the waiting room, but at the time, my mind, as I said, was not thinking very clearly at all. I stayed in an acute wing in the hospital for about 2 weeks. They checked my vitals several times a day and night. I had to go to group therapy. I drank Ensure all day until I was finally back to a healthy weight. That man and his family messed me up good. I hope to never see them again. It has been almost 10 years and I still have nightmares about them. I had one last night, in fact. They mostly just show up in the dream and stand there. I finally had the courage to Google the name of the cult, and after some digging found out they were called the 2x2s. Be wary who you put your faith in, people. This happened about 20 years ago. I was not raised in a church. My parents both grew up with very religious parents, and they did not want to force that upon us. Even so, in high school I got very religious about God, religion and all of that, so I started dating a guy in 9th grade who took me to church with him. He was Southern Baptist, so I kept going. We eventually broke up, but that was my first real experience with church. At the time, I just wanted to do the right thing. That is not really the story though, it's just the background. Fast forward to my senior year, I started dating a guy in my grade. He was popular and pretty mysterious. Everyone knew he was religious, but no one really knew what kind. People knew because his mum would show up to choir concerts wearing long skirts and no jewelry or makeup, and her hair was always in a bun. His best friend didn't even know what church he went to, but he told me they did not have a TV and were not allowed to watch movies. I was nervous to ask him what church he went to, even though we were dating, and after 3 months I figured I should probably know. I had asked him a few times to come with me to the Baptist church, but he always said no. Finally, I worked up the courage and asked him what church he went to. His reply, "You should see for yourself." I was excited at first. I thought he was inviting me into his world, into his life. I went out, bought a long skirt, put my hair up, and figured I should be respectful and dress like his mother. He picked me up the next Wednesday evening and drove me out to the meeting. It was in a Holiday Inn conference room. Everyone there was very old except for me, my boyfriend, his younger brother, and 2 toddlers. The meeting, which is what they called it, was run by 2 very elderly women from Ireland, or at least I think they were. I could barely understand them, but they were using normal Bibles, so I didn't feel too uncomfortable at first. They had a hymnal that just said hymns on the front, and everyone sang a cappella. There were never any instruments. It was strange, but because they were using a regular Bible, I figured it was probably fine. My mother was dating, doing business with, and co-owning a house with this man a few years ago. One day his nephew Scott came up from Nova Scotia to work for his uncle and rent the houseboat he and my mother co-owned. He moved in December, and by the time Christmas rolled around, we were all at my family's Christmas party and were still starting to get to know him. I'm not entirely sure how, but the conversation turned to cults, and Scott immediately said, "Oh man, you don't even want to talk to me about cults." My brother, half joking and not really thinking, said, "What, you were raised by the children of God or something?" And Scott's jaw dropped visibly. "How did you know that?" he shouted. It was a completely random guess. It was just the first cult name that popped into my brother's head. None of us expected it to land like that. Scott didn't say much after that. He was quiet and reserved, and the little he did say made it obvious that his childhood had been rough, and he would rather not get into it. But during the party, it was very clear that there was something noticeably off about him. Perhaps it had been his turbulent upbringing, and at the time it was easy to excuse him as being quiet or awkward. The story then goes that he would disappear for stretches, miss work, or show up looking worn out and distant. He checked himself into the hospital after several attempts at taking his own life, and not long after that, he got kicked out of both the jobs and the house because he never showed up nor paid rent. Then one day, Scott disappeared on his way to work at the power station. At first, everyone figured he had run off or finally acted on the darker thoughts he had been carrying around. But days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, and no one had seen hide nor hair of him. People kept asking if there had been any signs, any clues to his whereabouts, but there never were. Years later, a hiker found bones scattered near the woods, near where he had been living. It was him, all right. The cause of death is still unknown. Part of me wonders if it was his religious upbringing in the cult that affected him so deeply. Even though he got out, he was still there in his mind, and he couldn't escape it entirely. We had just moved from the West Coast to the Midwest. Finding a place to stay was difficult because our family was so large. But one of our uncles let us use the other half of his duplex. It was this huge 2-story house, and for a while that became our new home. One night, the kids were down in the basement around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we noticed a door we had never noticed before. We kept daring each other to open it, but none of us wanted to be the first because we were all scared. It just sat there in the dark, looking like it had always been a part of the basement, even though none of us remembered ever seeing it before. The next morning we told my grandfather about the room. He went down into the basement and opened the door, and inside was only a small room. I remember how dark it was in there. The only light came from the doorway when he opened it, and even that barely reached the back wall. He looked inside for a moment and then said, "You stay right there." He got my father, and the two of them went quickly to the farmer's to get a chicken. My grandfather was a traditional shaman. He gave thanks to the chicken in a respectful way, and then ended its life. The blood was collected in a bowl. He put on a shamanic hat and his finger bells. The hat covered his entire face, and he opened the door again. It was like he was stepping into something that none of us were supposed to witness. He went into the room with a bowl of chicken blood and the finger bells, one on each hand, and began chanting. He said a kind of incantation and placed the blood in the room. Then he came back out and closed the door behind him. After that, he kept chanting, and we could hear the bowl moving inside. It made this strange spinning sound, and when it finally stopped, he opened the door again. His chanting got louder, and the sound seemed to echo more as he continued. We were not allowed to witness what was happening in the room during the exchange, but I remember hearing his finger bells moving as if he were walking into a corner. When he came back out, he was carrying the bowl, which still had a small amount of chicken blood left in it, along with what looked like a little hand-stitched doll wrapped in red twine. The doll was soaked in blood. I can remember that clearly. He took a match and set the doll on fire in the bowl. Then he told my father to make sure it got taken outside and to not let the fire go out before he reached the door. I still do not know how the bowl with the chicken blood stayed burning. I doubt the blood itself was what caught, so the only thing I could think of was the doll. Once my father carried it out, I got a good look into the room. You could faintly see where the chicken blood had splattered around the walls. We had to clean it up later with flashlights because the room was so dark, and the blood was smeared everywhere. Well, a few days later, in the middle of the night, I woke up to my mother and father panicking, because there was smoke everywhere. We went out into our room to see what was happening, and my father was running back and forth from the bathroom to the source of the smoke with a pail of water. My mother gathered all of us outside and called the fire department. We all made it out, but my grandfather was nowhere to be found. My dad ran back into the duplex, and after what felt like forever, he came out carrying my grandfather on his back. Somehow, my grandfather still had the shaman hat on, which confused me at the time. Years later, after my grandfather had passed away, I asked my father where he had found him. He said the smoke had been coming from near the basement stairs, and he found my grandfather in a deep trance facing a wall. He pulled him out before carrying him outside. The strange part was that the firefighters said the fire must have suffocated itself because they couldn't find an actual fire anywhere. Still, the kitchen walls and the basement walls were all blackened from the fire afterwards. I wonder if he summoned some kind of demon from his religious practices. And I can't remember what the religion was, but I think it was some kind of cult. In the summer of 2013, I had just gotten home from a night shift at around 10 p.m. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed into bed. Honestly, I was exhausted and ready to pass straight out. Just as I began drifting off, my phone buzzed. This was my then girlfriend Anne. She was finishing up work at the restaurant where she waited tables and told me her co-workers were heading out to explore a cave in the hills just outside of Eugene, Oregon. She asked if I'd want to come with her, because she said she didn't want to go alone. Now Anne is stubborn. She would have gone even if I said no, but something about the way she said it, her tone, made me uneasy. I didn't know her co-workers very well, and I didn't like the idea of her venturing into the woods at night with people I couldn't fully trust. So despite being ready to tap out for the night, I agreed. When I got to the restaurant, they were still closing up. One of her co-workers, who I barely knew, came up to me with this weird, excited energy and asked, "Are you ready to see the Inferno Cave?" Immediately my stomach dropped. Anne hadn't told me it was that kind of place. I held strong Judeo-Christian beliefs my entire life, and so has she. We're both sensitive to the paranormal, and neither of us had any interest in reigniting things we'd tried to stay well hidden from. Honestly, I felt blindsided, but at the same time I really didn't want her going alone, so I kept my mouth shut and went along. We loaded into my sedan, me, Anne, and one co-worker to guide us, and took off a little after 11 p.m. It wasn't until a good 40 minutes later until we reached a narrow service road off a rural highway. The guide told us this was a spot, and the road ended near an old forestry access gate that was rusted shut, just under an overpass cutting across the hills. "It's just past here," he said. The second I stepped out of the car, it felt uncomfortable. I could just feel something in the air, and it was getting under my skin. I started lagging behind the others, and that was when I felt a hand grip my shoulder. When I spun around, no one was there. We crawled under the gate and started up a short hill that led beneath the overpass. Anne and I turned on our phone flashlights, but almost immediately, the others told us to shut them off. We tried, but they wouldn't respond. Our phones started heating up in our hands like they were about to burst. In the end, I had to take the battery out of mine just to get it to stop. I looked at Anne. "Do you feel that?" She nodded. "Yeah, I don't like this." I felt something had latched onto me, like I'd stepped into some invisible current and couldn't get out. We kept walking. At the top of the hill, tucked into the base of the overpass, was a jagged hole, about 2 feet wide, punched into the concrete. One by one, the group climbed in. Anne followed and I went last. She was halfway through when she suddenly stopped. Frozen, I whispered her name. No answer. I squeezed in beside her to see what had stopped her and instantly understood. The space inside wasn't huge, but it felt endless. There was blood on the ground, real blood, not dried fake stuff from teenagers playing Satan for TikTok. There were candles, pentagrams, burnt black feathers, newspaper cutouts warped with moisture and age, and the air reeked of rot. Our lights flickered, and in one corner there was a stuffed ball, torn open and charred, almost ritualistically placed. In another, a mouldy old couch faced the far wall like someone used it regularly, and the ground was littered with bones, some of them clearly animal, others I didn't want to guess at. Above us, cars rumbled over the freeway, but inside the cave it was dead silent except for the crunch of debris underfoot and our own breath. I looked at Anne. "Nope, we're done." We turned and crawled out, leaving the others behind. They were laughing, saying it was harmless, just a place local punks used for graffiti or rituals, but I wasn't laughing. I felt spiritual darkness before, and it was no joke. After we got back to the car, no one spoke, and we ended up driving to a place locals called Gravity Hill, an eerie little road where your car is supposed to roll uphill. But that's another story. On the way home, I pulled into Anne's place and she asked me to come inside as she didn't want to be alone. The entire night, from the moment we left that cave to sitting in her living room, we both felt watched, like something else was there. She asked me to pray over her before I left, and I did. For the next week, both of us felt uncomfortable, like something had attached itself to us and we had strange dreams. The feeling of being watched never really faded, but it did eventually leave, which I am grateful for. When I was 15, I moved to Utah. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City, far enough west that the wind would carry the smell of the lake and leave the air reeking like spoiled seawater. I got dumped halfway through sophomore year, which was pretty awful for an awkward kid in a new place. In Utah, high school started with sophomore year, so I was basically a freshman twice over. The only real luck I had was a girl called Sarah. We started dating right at the end of the school year, which meant we got to spend most of the summers together. There was something I did not know about Mormons, and something I had not certainly understood yet. They really liked big families, something about spirits in heaven needing bodies, so it was not unusual for some of the more devout Mormon families to have 8, 9, or even more kids, which mostly meant outdoor freezers packed with hamburger helpers and kitchens built bigger than most people needed. Sarah's family was pretty Mormon, and my family did not really practice anything, so we just never really talked about religion. She had 6 sisters, 7 kids total counting her, ranging from 6 to about 18. I only met her mum the once. She was pregnant. She appeared to always be pregnant. I never really spoke to her dad. I was too overwhelmed by the whole thing and mostly avoided her family whenever I could. Looking back, I probably would have figured things out sooner, but I'd only been in Utah for about 6 months and everything already seemed strange to me. I remember one night in particular when I had picked her up. She had a curfew that meant I had to park down the street so she could sneak out. I wanted to jump over a small gully lined with trees beside her house, but she refused, so we had to walk around instead. That meant passing right by her parents' window. I thought that was odd, but I just assumed she was concerned about getting her feet wet. Now, this went on for a few months. We would have a routine where I would stop down the street, wait for a while, and it would be then that she walked around the house, along the gully, and back up to meet me. Sometimes I would meet her near the road, but I always made sure to not step too far onto the lawn for fear that I might wake up her parents. One night, it was raining, and I did not want her walking out alone in the dark. I had planned to surprise her by meeting her at the back door that she used to sneak out through. To save time and to avoid walking past the window, I went over by the trees and looked down at the gully. The water was a little higher than usual and moving faster because of the runoff, but I thought I could make the jump. Turns out I was wrong. My feet landed in the mud on the other side, and I sank immediately into the wet earth and splashed hard into the muck. The cold water rushed around my ankles, and I reached up to grab a storm drain. The thing I grabbed shifted loose and started to move with me. The water was not very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, so I shoved my shoes against the bottom and stood up, still holding what turned out to be a black garbage bag. I dropped it and started to crawl up, but my hand landed on another. I tried to pull myself higher, but they kept slipping under me in the slick, greasy grime. It must have been the 3rd or 4th time I tried to find something solid when I accidentally tore one bag open. At first, I thought it was some rotten orange thing, black and decayed, living in a mess of old bones. Then I could make out more of it. Yellow skin, stretched over white bone, bloated and ruined. It was an infant's skull. I shouted, though I don't know what else I could have done in that situation, because the miasmic assault on my nostrils was awful. I was suddenly terrified to be near it, and I scrambled out through the mud and slammed myself against a tree. My heart was thudding in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. Sarah was out there. She was crying. She had actually been waiting for me by the street, and came running when she heard me shout. She must have already known, because I never saw her again, and after that all the girls were pulled from school. The local news said her father had decided that he had had enough kids and was burying each newborn out by the gully. They recovered 5 bodies, all girls, and I always wondered whether he had just been waiting for a son. Scientology is a strange, all-consuming kind of beast, like most cults are. My ex-husband only knew and associated with people in Scientology, but a lot of his friends were actually very nice and genuinely cool to me. I made a lot of friends through him, but I never felt openly pressured to join. But the insidiousness was absolutely there, and I'll get to that in a minute. My ex-husband was raised in it. You could say he was a second-generation Scientologist. His parents had actually joined in the L. Ron Hubbard days, and they were deep into it. Not only that, they both worked for the church's auditors. They were dirt poor. Almost all of their money went back to the church, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not only that, they were so far in debt, with no health insurance and barely made enough money for anything except rent on their tiny rundown apartment. And that part made me the saddest, because they were the nicest people going. I married him when I was younger and more idealistic, and willing to overlook major differences. I was a little lost myself, and really just wanted to connect with somebody. I had always been an atheist, and was actually pretty against organized religion, but he kept assuring me that Scientology was not something he was active in, and that it would not be a problem. He was not taking courses at all at the time while we were dating or engaged, so I believed him. I thought Scientology was more of his parents' thing than his. It was after we got engaged that he started telling me that a friend of his needed some help. She was training to become an auditor and needed someone to practice on. I said no. He kept asking and insisting that it was just for her practice, that it did not mean I was doing Scientology, and that it would mean a lot to him. In the end, I agreed. It was honestly such a strange experience. You just sit in a room with the auditor and hold these little cans. The whole process they use to try and get cans set right so they supposedly pick up your wavelengths or whatever they call it. It's almost ridiculous. Lotion on the hands, squeeze the cans, then that doesn't work, so you take a walk, drink some water, lotion again, squeeze the stupid cans and keep repeating that over and over until something on the auditor's end says it's working. I lied through it the whole time. They acted like I had some amazing breakthrough and gave me a floating needle, and that was that. Except then they kept calling me back over and over. I thought it was a one-time favor to help this new girl out, but apparently not. They wanted 3-hour sessions, day after day on weekdays. No wonder Scientologists are all poor as hell, because they want you in constantly during work days. I genuinely became so difficult with them that they gave up trying to call me. I guess they figured being married to one wasn't enough, and they would get me eventually anyway. The Scientologists lower on the bridge tend to know almost nothing about the Xenu stuff. I asked them about it and they acted like they'd never heard of it. I guess you do not get to read that material until much later, after we've already sunk a few $100,000 into it. The real insidious part I saw was how naturally they learned to scam people. I watched a Scientologist-owned business get taken down by the feds for fraudulent clients. The reason I divorced him was because he stole a large sum of money from my account that was not supposed to be touched. It just vanished, and he had nothing to say for it. Then he opened 2 credit cards in my name and maxed them out, and put me in financial ruin. It was a complete disaster. When I was around 17, I felt lost and was stuck in a job which I hated. I was surrounded by co-workers who did not like me. A lot of it came down to my accent. I was fairly well spoken, so they assumed I was some rich kid, and for it made my life miserable. One Friday after work, I had had enough. My factory job had half days on Fridays, so I spent the rest of the afternoon wandering around the city where I lived, looking for a way out. I visited the police recruitment center, the army, the Navy, the Air Force offices, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to leave that life behind me. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets, and still no clue what I wanted to do. Then I turned a corner and saw a sign that caught my eye immediately. Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in. Above the building was a big, polished sign that read, "The Church of Scientology." I already knew what Scientology was, and I also knew about the horror stories, but I had this morbid curiosity about it. And Tom Cruise did happen to be my favorite actor at the time, so in my stupid teenage logic, I thought maybe it could not be that bad. Famous last words indeed. I went inside, which is where a very friendly woman greeted me right away and asked how she could help. I asked if I could speak to someone about the church and the personality test, and she said she would be happy to assist me. Not long after, I was introduced to an older guy called Alan, who was the head of the local Scientology center. Alan took me into a private room, and the first thing I noticed was a large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and talked for a while. I told him I was unhappy where my life was going, and that I wanted to get out, and that I was having trouble at work. He seemed genuinely concerned, and for a while, I felt like he really wanted to help me. Then, I agreed to take the personality test. He handed it to me and left me alone, saying to bring it back to the receptionist when I was finished. It took me 2 full hours to complete. I'm not exaggerating, it was around 500 questions about everything imaginable. When I finally handed it in, the receptionist said it would take a while to process. While they were doing that, Alan told her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I expected some tiny room with a television on the wall, but they actually had a proper cinema. It could seat around 50 people and had a big screen at the front. Sitting alone in a Scientology-owned movie theater was weird enough. I still remember that clearly. The film was about half-hour in length, and it had a narrator talking about strange feelings people have, with some mediocre acting scenes playing alongside it. I remember one section about self-doubt, like locking a door and going back to check on it again. Another part suggested that something bad happened to your mother while she was pregnant could have affected you later in life. There was also some weird part about rotten eggs and how an event involving them can harm you emotionally. It sounded ridiculous now, but at the time, it actually sort of made sense. Well, after the film was over, I was taken back to Alan's office, and he gave me the results. He told me I was extremely depressed. One of the most unmotivated people he had ever met, lacking cognitive thinking and a waste of talent. That upset me a lot, but then he said he could help me. He gave me 4 books and a DVD, and told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. I asked him what course. That's when he told me he had already signed me up for one at the center. He warned me that if I did not do it, my life would soon spiral out of control. Then he pushed me to hand over a lot of money for the course, and told me I would get an email with the details since it was scheduled for about a month later. I left the center and ran home, and spent the entire weekend reading the books and watching the DVD over and over. I basically locked myself in my room and did nothing else. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions, and the more I thought about it, the more I began resenting my mother. I convinced myself she was the problem, that everything bad in my life had come from her. I started treating her badly, swearing at her, and ignoring her as much as I could. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the source of my problems, I should consider disconnecting from her, and I took that seriously. I actually started planning to cut her out of my life completely. A week before the course, I developed a bizarre God complex. From what I had read in those books, I thought I finally knew what I could become. I started looking down on everyone in my family. I became spiteful and cruel. Then, just a few days before the course, my mother and father confronted me. They said they were worried about me, and searched my room. My dad pulled out all of the Scientology books and the DVD, and I completely lost it. I screamed at them, cussed at them, and said horrible things. I told them I was going to leave and never wanted to see them again. We argued for hours. There were tears, shouting, and a lot of pain on both sides. But in the end, they convinced me that the church was a bad place. They told me that if I was miserable at work, I should have told them, and they were right. To this day, I can't believe I never said anything to them first, but went to Scientology instead. That night, after all of the fighting ceased, they sat with me and comforted me. I honestly could not believe it, after the way I had treated them for the previous 3 weeks. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I wasn't coming back to the church. He quickly answered, asking why and whether my family was stopping me, polluting my mind and decisions. I ignored him. The emails that followed over the next few weeks were insane. He told me to leave my family and said I could stay at the church. He kept trying to blame everything on my mother. At one point, he even emailed me something along the lines of not being surprised if he read in the papers that I had been found dead from taking my own life. I'm pretty sure that crossed a line, but I just kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was one written entirely in binary. I copied it into a translator, but it came back as a mess of random letters and numbers that made no sense at all, and in the end I eventually blocked him. Even that did not fully stop though. 2 or 3 times a year, I still get emails from the church. They ask how I'm doing or about my family, and every time I'll block this new address, but they keep coming. People saying they heard about my case, and that they're concerned about me. The reason I'm sharing this is because I got another one the other day, and it made me think this could be a good warning to everyone. Do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they could twist me up that badly in just a few hours, I do not want to think about what they could do to someone over months or years. If anyone knows how to block an entire cult from your email, please do let me know. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope you have enjoyed tonight's collection of cult stories, some of my favorites. And if you did, you can let me know down below. Your thoughts and comments are always very much appreciated. I would like to give an extra special thank you to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen for their continued support of the channel. And if you would like to get some cool extra perks, you could follow the link down below to find out more. But that's it from me. Until next time, guys, stay awesome, and good night.